Welcome to MSUA's Game Changers Live, where we speak with satellite and mobile connectivity leaders about industry trends, new technologies, and share what you need to know about where satellite is headed in the future. I'm your host, Lisa Dreer, and I'm really excited to introduce our guest for today, Dimitri Buchs. He is a managing consultant at Euroconsult. And welcome to the show, Dimitri. Sorry, I was just getting a little alert there. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Lisa. It's a pleasure being here with you today.
Great. So maybe you can start by giving us just a little bit of background on yourself and Euroconsult.
Sure. Sounds good, yeah. So as you said, I'm a managing consultant at Euroconsult. So I'm based in Montreal in Canada. So I joined Euroconsult more than 10 years ago. I'm part of our SATCOM team, and I'm mostly focused on consulting and market intelligence reports. So including, for example, being the editor of our flagship SATCOM report called Satellite Connectivity and Video Market. In terms of maybe an overview of Euroconsult and what we do, right? So we're the leading global strategy consulting and market intelligence firm. We're specialized in the space sector and satellite-enabled verticals. And so we usually accompany private companies and governments in strategic decision-making. And among our activities, I would say, so among the main ones, we provide end-to-end consulting services. We also release more than a dozen market intelligence reports per year. So focus on different thematics like connectivity, which will be the focus today for the interview. And we also organize events and thematic conferences, including the Satellite Business Week in Paris. And as well, last but not least, we offer training services for organizations that wish to know more about the space sector.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for that background. And we are really excited to have you here today. Maybe we can start by talking a little bit about, there's just a ton of changes happening in the satellite industry right now. And, obviously the increased commercialization of space, and there's a lot of new entrants into the market. Maybe you can give us a little bit of perspective on kind of all of these things that are happening in our industry right now and what you're seeing.
Sure, definitely interesting times for the SATCOM industry and satellite overall. So, I think the past year has been one of the most eventful, I would say, on record for the SATCOM industry. So if you look at the past 12 months alone, we saw multiple constellations make significant progress, led by Starlink, for example. Potential disruptors continue to invest in constellation projects, a lot of M&A activity across the entire value chain as well, right? And major announcements, for example, of direct-to-mobile communications, so the latest ones being Apple with Globalstar satellites, but also Starlink with T-Mobile. And so all of this happened while the SATCOM industry continues its, let's say, post-COVID recovery with so capacity usage increasing markedly and a return to growth that we're expected to see this year in the SATCOM industry. Mm-hmm. So as you highlighted in your introduction, right? So SATCOM industry revenues as well have been more like a downward trend, I would say, in the past few years, and this is mainly due to decreasing bandwidth prices. So the negative impact of video services as well, and the impact of COVID-19, especially on mobility markets in the past couple of years prior to 2022. So when we look at 2022, so I mentioned before that we're expecting industry revenues to renew with growth, and despite continued, let's say, pricing fall, right? So prices continue to decrease. And so this is due the expected growth to even faster growth in leased capacity expected this year. And we typically see this being driven by, it could be either large government connectivity projects or mobility as well. And so if you look at nowadays what's happening, so projects are routinely reaching the scale of Gbps, and even the largest service providers in the industry are now leasing tens of Gbps, right? So this rapid growth we're seeing in 22 and expecting in coming years is being driven by two main factors. So the first one is increasing demand for connectivity, as I mentioned before, and the second one is changing economics, right, of satellite overall. So looking at demand for connectivity, so it has really accelerated since COVID-19, so especially in the second half of this year, with governments spending more on universal access programs, like businesses as well spending on increased digitization, and as well like work from home for sure, leading to more people working in remote areas. Then looking maybe at the verticals, so such as in-flight connectivity, this segment has recovered impressively this year post-COVID. well, I would say in short, people are using more bandwidth, and this trend is likely to continue in coming years.
Yeah.
So yeah, and so just for the second driver I mentioned before, right? So it's the step change in bandwidth usage with supply side economics. So namely the fact that satellites continue to get more cost effective, and the number of GBPS being launched continues to increase with each new generation of satellites. So one thing to note is that most future geostationary satellites, so GEO satellites, will have at least partly flexible or software-defined payloads. And as well, in parallel, we're expecting all future second generation constellations to have software-defined features as well. So in the long run, this may put further pressure on pricing, I would say, but this expected decrease in capacity pricing will be key to make satellite services more competitive in the future versus terrestrial networks.
Right.
Yeah. So I would say, yeah, those are the main things, I think.
Yeah. So, I mean, obviously, we're seeing more and more capacity come online from the LEO satellites or the low
Yes.
Earth orbit satellites. Do you think that we'll get into a situation where the capacity will overtake the demand, or do you think the demand's just going to continue to keep pace with that added capacity?
So I think we're expecting with the new generation of satellites they'll be more flexible to have higher fail rates than today, but there is so much capacity being added, and in coming years as well with constellations, but even the new VHTS satellites, that I don't think demand will necessarily catch up, right? So, but definitely there's more room for growth and more opportunities for governments, as I said before, the mobility industry and other even segments to expand thanks to the available capacity in coming years.
Right, great. So, we like to look at not only what's happening today, but what might happen, in the years to come. So if we
Sure.
look ahead, into the next decade, what do you see as some of the main drivers as we go further out in time?
So the main drivers, well, I would say, well, maybe a key one is services, right? So an increasing number of players have been looking at services, so adding services in recent years, and this should continue in the coming years. So this is due to falling average revenue per user and like a fiercely competitive market that have contributed to changes in strategies, right? With operators that are looking for extra revenues to avoid, let's say, the commodity price trap, right, of capacity only. And so services is a key thing that will help drive revenues in the future. We're seeing as well with this move towards services, increasing vertical integration, right? So we've seen in the past few months only like an acceleration. I can mention examples like OneWeb's acquisition of Trustcom, that was in 21. SCS acquired Leonardo DRS's Global Enterprise Solutions earlier this year. Hispasat as well, with Access Networks that was acquired earlier this year. So, I mean, overall, operators are moving towards like more vertical integration and in different manners, right? So I would say first by acquiring service providers, as I mentioned before, by manufacturing satellites. So we're seeing that with Viasat and Viasat-3, but as well like SpaceX and Amazon that are building their satellites for their constellations in-house. And so as well, I would say in terms of drivers in coming years, if you look, well, you can look at mobility, which is one of the main drivers, right? So well, they should be actually one of the fastest growing satcom markets in coming years. And so if we take maritime, for example, it includes main drivers will include crew welfare, for example, and retention, the penetration as well of lower end VSATs like in fishing. And so we're going to see as well new smart vessel applications that should really be increasingly used in this industry to promote fleet efficiency by preventing unpredicted downtime, optimizing energy consumption, and maintenance costs, for example. So I think crew retention in this case, in the case of maritime, which has always been actually an issue in this sector, will become even greater concern for ship operators due to the pandemic. And this requires the ship to be equipped with a VSAT solution for like bandwidth-hungry applications such as streaming. The aero market is another good example, right? So we're expecting a lot of growth in coming years, and so the main reason will be the need for higher bandwidth per plane. brought by an accelerating take rate in the number of aircrafts, as well as higher data consumption per passenger, right, to support increasingly bandwidth-hungry applications, as I mentioned before, streaming, and as well increasingly free access models that are expected to arise in coming years as well. And so these connectivity needs are driven by various types of communications, right? Coming either from the cabin to meet passenger demands or from the cockpit to enable flight optimization. But I would say that overall, when you look at aero, the passenger expectation of like a home-like experience, I would say, in the air should be the main driver of capacity and revenues in coming years.
Gotcha. So when you think about some of the shifts that are happening in the industry, what would you say are some of the most notable changes that we've seen in the satellite industry over, kind of, I guess, leading up to some of these longer term changes that you're talking about?
Sure. So some of the main changes, I mean, I would say, as I said before, a lot more services. That's one of the key changes in the industry. Another one is as well more partnerships. I think that's something that we're observing as well. So like, for example, competition is growing, like so that's because, when companies who compete in the same market collaborate in areas of their business where one party holds, let's say, a competitive advantage over the other. So we're seeing this more and more. And this is taking the shape in terms of like strategic rationale. So the main rationale actually is cooperation, is support for regional expansions. It can be as well tactical market opportunities. And as well, what we're seeing more and more is like diversification into non-geo capacity. So more and more NGSO, like LEO and MEO constellations, right? So that's some of the changes we're seeing in the industry. And so I think those are some of the main changes.
That's great. So from a user perspective, obviously, as the Mobile Satellite Users Association, we're always looking at, the customers, the people that are actually using these satellite services. So what do you see as how these innovations are actually supporting and helping the user community?
So I think, it's definitely good news of what's happening in the industry for the users themselves, right? So I would say while end users of satellite connectivity have historically had to cope with limitations, right, in their user experience, they would expect to see the industry closing the gap in coming years with all this new capacity content coming to the market that I mentioned before, like more software-defined satellites, etc., right? So so adapt to new customer requirements, and including the ability for users to leverage as well cloud resources. This will be key in the future, and the availability of an enhanced broadband experience as well, enabled by significant satellite additions that I mentioned before, the global coverage offered by constellations, for example, but also the availability of multi-orbit services with more and more players offering not only GEO, but as well NGSO services. Let's say if I take a good example of the benefits to users, again, the aero industry is a good, let's say, good industry to look at. So because the possible throughput available to an aircraft is limited so far, today at least, to several Mbps, airlines must find ways to limit the bandwidth usage per passenger, right? As around, I think it's around 500 kbps of throughput per passenger is required to properly really enjoy like a video experience in the plane, right? So I would say with new standards like HD, each passenger would require several Mbps, right? So which is an issue today, but in the future, with massive supply additions and the first constellations, so we're expecting to provide capacity to airlines from 23. So the user experience should become much more pleasant overall for passengers. When you look at the multi-orbit services that I mentioned before, such as the one planned, for example, by Intelsat and OneWeb, right? So LEO will provide, I would say, the global coverage and the low latency, right, for the service. And the GEO part will add the ability to bring capacity in, I would say, very high densely populated places, airports being a good example, right? So overall, this will be good because we, as passengers, will be able to have a better, like, let's say, broadband experience when flying in the future. Cloud solutions, I think, are key too, right? That's a key point to mention, I think, with in the industry today. So when looking at how cloud solutions will improve satellite services for satellite networks, where the available capacity could continue to be constrained against terrestrial networks in many locations in the future? Well, the ability to leverage local storage and like data management, this could represent really a strong opportunity to optimize network efficiency. If I take an example again, let's say in the maritime segment, today's solutions are really tailored, and this limits the access to the high end of the market, like cruise, like mega yachts, etc. And so with future commercial potential more open solutions that are expected to come to the market, this will enable to increase the market reach in the maritime segment. And I think this will be the same in most segments. Like if you take the aero in-flight connectivity market as well, having more, I would say, more virtualized modem solution in that market could also improve for airlines as well, like in the future.
Got it. So when you're looking at the roadmap ahead, what network and business innovations are expected to really help build the scale of the SATCOM industry?
Yeah, good question. So I mentioned some of the innovations, so when answering your previous questions, but overall, I would say when looking at like network innovations, I think the market is really heading towards like a multi-orbit software-defined network that's even fully integrated in the 5G world, right? So with the launch of new very high throughput satellites like Viasat-3 or the continued deployment of constellations, supply is expected to grow exponentially. So to give you an idea, I think, well, supply reached around 16 Tbps last year, right? And it's expected to expand to over 90 Tbps in 27. So really exponential growth, right? And this will have a significant impact on the market. So one thing to note as well is that to avoid the risk of too much unutilized satellite capacity, so you asked before about maybe demand being higher than supply, right? But we're not there yet, right? And one thing that will need to happen as well is for the ground segment to develop in coming years for this unused or unutilized capacity to be filled, right? So I think this will be key. And also the software-defined aspect, right, with future software-defined satellites will allow to make better use of the available capacity in coming years. Another key point, and there's a lot of discussion in the industry today around that, is 5G, right? So the seamless transfer of connectivity from satellite networks to 5G mobile networks remains really, I would say, in its infancy right today, but significant technology advancements in both the space segment and in the ground segment. So for example, virtualization and cloud. So this will allow satellite solutions to meet the higher 5G network requirements. And in terms of capacity, cost, and quality of service, this should allow satellite solutions to really address a bigger audience, right? This, I think, will be key as well for satellite to grow in coming years, right? So, and one last thing I'd like to mention related to this question is the push for edge computing and like local caching as well. That should lead to cost synergies in coming years. Because one thing to note is that so far, cost savings enabled by the lower price capacity, right, have led service providers to deliver improved services. So you're seeing higher data rates, you're seeing higher data allowances as well. But overall, I think that the cost of services today remains higher. And I would even say too high for many users or end users. And future cost savings would be expected to go down to end users in coming years with the new generations of satellites, right? Which will lower the cost of satellite services and potentially lead to a bigger share of the pie for satellite, I think. So, I mean, I can give you a couple of really good examples. Satellite penetration of the addressable, so universal broadband access market, right, currently stands at less than 10%, which is very low, so there's a lot of room for growth, right? And also, when you look at mobility, so the aero and maritime markets, right? So today, less than 20% of the addressable market for mobility is captured by satellite, right? So when you think about that, right, the fact that there is still so much room for growth in end user adoption is really, I think, great news for the satellite industry overall in coming years.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I want to end with one last question, which you may already be aware, but the Mobile Satellite Users Association is celebrating our 30th year this year. Yes. And so we always like to kind of get really futuristic here and ask you for your one prediction about what'll happen in the next 30 years of satellite technologies.
Sure. Well, first of all, congratulations for this 30th birthday. And so, yeah, that's a very good question. first 30 years seems very far away, right? So when thinking about where satellite was 30 years ago, and even simply like, well, the fact that most people did not have access to internet at the time, right? So just to put everything in perspective, but I would say, okay, if I have to, well, one prediction would be maybe that satellite will help bridge the digital divide, which is a key topic, right? In recent years for governments around the world, right? So today, the unconnected population is really predominantly offline because of cost considerations, right? And I mentioned cost a lot in the when answering your previous questions, right? With the cost of satellite that needs to go down, right? So, this is either linked to the lack of financial investment, the fact that the population remains unconnected, or to the fact that available services remain prohibitive, right? As I mentioned before, when you look at broadband, consumer broadband, right, services are often in the $50 to $100 range, even higher in some cases. And as a result, around 40% of the global population is still unconnected, right? So with the innovations in the satellite industry that I mentioned before, like more capacity, etc., right, lower prices, I think satellite should be a key contributor to help bridge the digital divide, I don't know if in 20, 30 years, but in the coming decades for sure. And yeah, I think that would be one prediction. For me.
Great. Well, we all hope that that prediction will come to pass for sure. So I want to thank you so much for being here today, Dimitri. It was really terrific to hear your insights and just kind of get a really great lay of the land in terms of what's happening in the satellite industry right now. So thank you for being here.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. I want to take just a moment to thank the Mobile Satellite Users Association for hosting these sessions. You can learn more about the Mobile Satellite Users Association at MSUA.org and learn how you can join and become a member, or also learn how you can make nominations for our upcoming Satellite Mobile Innovation Awards that happen during Satellite 2023 in March in Washington, D.C. So be sure to visit msua.org to learn more, and we'll see you next time on MSUA's Game Changers Live.